Sorry about that, Dan. So an overview of what we're doing this evening. I just did a welcome that was improvised, and I'm sure it was really great. We're going to talk about the objectives and the norms for the committee and the role of the advisory committee. So an overview of this meeting tonight, we're going to be processing what happened last week. We did a deep dive into charter system, that option. The role of this advisory team, again, is to really study these options and think about what they may mean for APS and what they could mean for APS. The community visioning sessions started on Tuesday, and we're getting feedback through those about the direction that the community feels like we need to go, the big ideas that we see in the future for the district that we might be able to use one of these operating models to facilitate. We are taking community input. If you're a community member who is interested in speaking to the committee this evening, you need to sign up on the sheet at the table outside this room. And we also have a feedback station where you can use the computer in the back corner to fill out a survey and provide us with input anonymously that way. So we're going to talk about, again, kind of at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to break up in teams and do some processing of the first option that we did the deep dive into last week, which is charter system. We're going to have a presentation from Mr. Chuck Burbridge, who's our Chief Financial Officer, about the current waivers that we're using and the advantages that we get, what we're using those waivers for tonight. And then we will have a guest speaker, Dr. Steve Flint, who is the Chief Strategy and Performance Officer in Gwinnett County Schools, to talk us through their experience with the Investing in Educational Excellence, IE² model. We'll have time for questions, then we'll transition to our community input session, and then we will do our closing for the day. So the objectives of this meeting, we have reviewed the agenda. I believe there are minutes from the last meeting in the handouts that you had at your station. If you want to take those handouts and just stick them behind the August 28th tab in your binder, hopefully everybody remembered to bring that binder back with them. Team expectations and norms. We're discussing the advantages and challenges of each model, reviewing waivers, reviewing the case study, and receiving community input. Those are our objectives for this evening. Our norms, we talked about these at the beginning of each meeting, so I'm not going to read them over. But as an overview, please be nice. Please speak your mind. This is really important and critical work, and we need to appreciate each other and the time that we're all dedicating to this, and be as honest as possible about the challenges that face our system and the vision that we have for what we want in the future for our kids. So the role of the advisory committee, as some reminders. The purpose of this committee is not just to sit in meetings together, it's also to be ambassadors for this work in the district, and that's why it was really important that there be representatives of all of our staff kind of units, as well as all of our kind of grass tops leaders in the district who are doing work with the community and our parents. So we're asking that people provide active and visible, tangible support. If it's possible, like if you're not the representative whose district community session is happening tonight, it would be great if you could attend the session that's happening in your community, though we will be getting a report from all of those at the end, and there will be some workshops that share the results of those sessions as well as answer all the questions that we're collecting at the end. You are also welcome to attend any of the other sessions in the other districts. They are not limited to only residents of those particular districts. We just wanted to make sure that we had at least one session that was accessible, relatively accessible to all of our various communities around the district geographically. We hope that you'll serve as a champion of this program, taking the information that you learn and taking it back to the faculty at your school, the parents in your community, or the community grassroots leaders that it is that you are working with in your community. Please encourage engagement and participation. I know that another email went out. I got my parent email today from the Infinite Campus Messenger reminding people about the community sessions. You know, if you can send those out to leaders in your NPUs or whoever might be interested in the sessions, please encourage that. And please share information neutrally. Some feedback that I heard about some of the community visioning sessions already is that people were asking a lot of questions about what decisions had been made, and they really haven't been made. And you guys are the people who know that because you're walking through this process with me as a member of this task force, and we're really trying to figure out the vision for where we want to go for the district, and then from that, figure out kind of what the best model is for us to get to that vision. So if you can please kind of share that message with your communities and other parents and stakeholders, that is what we're hoping this committee will be, in addition to coming together to really analyze and deep dive on the choices. I talked about the community input and feedback station. Again, if my community members want to sign up to speak to us for 2 minutes, the sign-up sheet's outside the door, and we have the feedback station in the back. So, okay, here we're to our activity. What we're gonna do now is divide up into 3 groups and just do some kind of processing and brain dumping. Everybody should have a handout that looks like this. Not that handout, the other one that you got. I'm not sure, did we have enough for everybody present? There are 2 sheets tonight. One of them says presentation notes form at the top, and this, we wanted you to have a graphic organizer for our presenter who will be here a little bit later. So this one, you're gonna put it away for right now. The presentation notes form is not the first one we'll use. The second one that says advantage and disadvantage are the top boxes. This one is the one that you're gonna take into your teams to do some processing and take some notes. And what we're gonna do as a team, the guiding question, hold on, let me check the slides and see if there's information about this. Okay. The guiding question that we're gonna use with this as we break up into our teams is, you know, thinking about what we learned last week from Fulton County about the charter system option. What are advantages, disadvantages, how might APS benefit, what might be some of the challenges APS would face with this particular model, and key considerations for implementation. So we're gonna take this form, graphic organizer, you're gonna get with some other folks from this room, and I will tell you how to move in just a moment. And the instructions are that you're gonna think about charter system in the APS context, what are advantages, disadvantages, and what would it look like for APS to do this. So everybody should have a Post-it note at their station. Pink, yellow, and blue. Yep. If I could have everybody who has a blue Post-it note come over here and sit with Mr. Burbridge. If I could have everybody who has a pink one come over here and sit near Dr. Betsy Bachman. And if I could have everybody with a yellow one sit near Alan Mueller. Raise your hand, please, Alan. So Alan is yellow, Chuck is blue, Betsy is pink. If I see that my teams are a little too homogeneous, I may move you around a little bit. Pink, Betsy, yellow, Alan, blue, Chuck.
check. Testing, testing. Check 1, 2. Okay. That's not great, but okay. Check. Check. Yeah. So I think he is going to stand behind the podium, and this is probably for Angela. Check. I'm sorry. Okay. Got the camera rolling like this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. Oh, yeah.
This is your 3-minute warning. Each group needs to pick one person to do an overview of what you talked about. And we're going to have a report out in 3 minutes. All right, please finish the sentence that you're speaking. All right, if you, we're going to start with the yellow team. Alan, we're going to start with the yellow team for reporting out because you guys have the microphone. Who is going to speak? So you have like just,
Hear me?
a short 1-minute overview of kind of the themes, major themes that your team talked about. And if you're not the speaker, please continue to jot down your thoughts. We're going to take up all of the handouts so that we get all the feedback from everybody.
Right.
But
So very quickly here, and please, I know people here will stop me if I say the wrong thing, but our enemy is time. I think we all acknowledge that and thought about the importance of sort of backwards planning and thinking about what we started with the first time we were here, which is looking at our kindergartners and thinking what we want for them when they graduate. But we're for advantages and disadvantages. I mean, we came up with lists for both. I mean, we think advantages, full flexibility will be really helpful. Charter system will require as well IE squared, of course, that we actually plan and engage around questions around accountability and flexibility. Some sort of decentralization is a natural part of the charter system, of course, at least in terms of governance, because we're pushing some power out to the schools. I think that's a positive thing. On the other hand, I think all of us expressed some concern with all those positives that it's really not going to work unless we're concerned that all schools are not at the same place and ready to build independent or more independent structures and to accept that decentralization, that there's sort of a poor distribution of all kinds of things around the city. So how are we going to know that all cities are going to be successful? And to enter down this path without knowing that all schools will be equally successful is challenging. And anything else I need to say? No, she's taking my microphone away. Goodbye.
Thank you, yellow team. I'm going to come to the pink team. Who was designated to speak? Stephanie.
Okay. You know what? We actually said the same things that you said exactly. Some of the things that we were talking about were having the autonomy for principals on this, on the advantage to move things along a little bit quicker. For example, Betsy was talking about a textbook issue, and I've been talking about some program issues and things. And sometimes it takes a long time once we go through our processes and it gets to the central office and maybe they don't agree with some of the things, or that it takes a long time to go through procurement, or even after you've done all the work on it. Now we'll have the autonomy to bring some of the programs in place as long as we're accountable for them. We also talked about what it might look like with CCRPI, and that although what everyone's going to have to understand is that there will be minimum expectations because CCRPI sets that in our accountability. So it's not like you can waive, when someone uses example, you can't say we're going to waive reading performance or anything like that. People are going to have to really and truly understand what we're talking about when we're talking about what we're going to place as in our performance targets, and what we're going to place as the what's the word I'm looking for? Stimulus for the target. You get what I'm saying, or I guess that's the word I'm using. But anyway, and how might we benefit from this model? One of the things we do know is that charter is going to give us more money. In any setting, more money means more opportunity. I mean, it just does for the most part. And what I mean by that is, like, when you're sitting here in a disadvantaged community, whatever, and you have kids who need to take AP exams, and the AP exams are $80-something a piece, or you need to take a $900, this is a little more funding coming from me that I can get more of my children taking these tests that aren't covered by title or federal funds or one of the other funds, or you get what I'm saying. So, like, my mind is all over the place with what I can do with the additional funding that will just come into my building with over 1,000 students.
And I get the microphone for a minute, and I'm going to add that we thought it was very exciting, the opportunity to support communities in developing leadership and having schools be change agents in communities to with developing leadership there.
Thank you. I think what I could add to the conversation so far is I think our group has a fairly healthy skepticism. We need a lot more information in terms of, I'm going to really point out two items, is that I don't think we heard clear examples of where the waiver flexibilities resulted in outcomes, measurable outcomes. We heard a lot about maybe one principal likes it, maybe the community feels good, or at least certain people in the school district feel good about it. But in terms of actually measurable results and cause and effect related between their waivers and the outcomes, I think we need more information. Similarly, I think we're a little reluctant to just drink the Kool-Aid on what does a charter district actually mean. When we look at the examples across the country of what charter schools and some of the progress or lack thereof that's occurred in the chartering process, and I think we would like more information, and that's a consideration for at least our implementation recommendations. We focused on the challenges as opposed to the advantages and disadvantages. I think probably a key consideration or a key challenge is one that I know I spoke with Courtney when he became board chair. If we have trouble determining what equity means when we're a traditional district, what does equity mean when we're a charter district? And how do you measure it? How do you ensure it? What are your guideposts on determining that we're really treating children and giving children an opportunity across the district as we approach this? And then I think we spoke to some of our concerns, challenges in governance. Apparently, we heard from the Fulton County principal that getting effective governance set up at a school level in Fulton County was a challenge, and in some ways that was under fairly good circumstances. And I think we had some experiences related that, getting effective governance set up at a school level is darn near impossible when you're not in good circumstances. And that this is a challenge that shouldn't be taken lightly by us in our considerations. So, is that my minute?
All right, that was great. Everybody seemed really engaged. And please, again, if you have additional things to say, please write them down. And if there are questions that we still want answered, you can write them down on your sheets as well. And we'll try to make sure that that gets answered, and we're going to take those up. So now I think we have a presentation from Chuck Burbridge, our CFO, about the waivers that APS is currently using.
Okay, we're handing out an 8-page handout that I just put together today. As I'm build on here, I'm going to talk about waivers, and hopefully you won't mind. I'm only going to talk about the waivers that I'm familiar with, and that's there's 3 specific waivers that I want to talk about this evening, and I'm going to do them in some ways. I think in my mind, I'm going to do them in order of what I think are importance. So the first waiver I'm going to speak to is consists of the first 2 pages of this 8-page handout. And the top page of the handout's labeled Minimum Direct Classroom Expenditure Calculation. It's usually referred to as a 65% rule, where basically the state has a requirement that school districts spend 65% of their money on direct instruction. So the top page I pulled off the DOE website to kind of give you a flavor of how this figure is derived. And so it probably gets a little bit too technical, but for some of you might enjoy this. Others, your eyes are going to glaze over. But what the top one says, essentially what this says, it gets you down to the very bottom block, and it says that when you measure 65% rule, you're taking total direct instruction expenditures, function 1,000, and dividing it by total all operating expenditures. So if you ever get a hold of a district budget, particularly maybe an older one, you'll see that we divide things up in functions. There's an instruction function, and you'll see these functions listed in this kind of the middle block: instruction, pupil services, media services, general administration, school administration. If you ever wondered why our budget book kind of looked the way it does, this is why. The state defines functions, and so we kind of have to organize our spending and our budget presentations around these function codes. So it's something that's in the system. They have definitions that go along with each of these functions. And then we, as a district, are able to define what we call program codes. one that many people are familiar with is Program 1200, which is classroom instruction. So Program 1200 is where we budget the majority of our teachers. Program 1200 is a program that's within the Function 1000 of instruction. Okay? And then that, in turn, you look at that, that's in the general fund, which is Fund 100. So when you think about all the coding we do, it kind of comes down to these guidelines from the state. We've got fund codes, we've got function codes, and then we get to define program codes. But it's important is that when the state's looking at 65%, they're taking the code function 1000 and basically dividing it by everything else that they say is included. There are some things that are excluded that they note here, and those are duly noted. So, so I'm going to turn to the second page now. If that was helpful. This is a page that you can't get as a member of the general public. Districts can get it if they log into the DOE website as a district. And essentially, this is the page where the state then calculates what's your percentage and gives you a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not you meet the rule. And so if you look at, I know it's small print, but basically there's two numbers I'm going to point out here on the right-hand column. You'll see there's a number of 56%, and below it there's a number 49%. So the 56% is our FY13 percentage of instruction to total expenditures. That's our calculation. And 49% was our FY12 calculation. So under the state's 65% rule, they are going to say that you meet the expectation if you increase your percentage by 2 percentage points. So since we went from 49% to 56%, they're saying you're okay. And so essentially you've got to keep doing that each year until you get to 65%. Otherwise, if you're not at 65%, you have to get a waiver. So technically last year we didn't need to get a waiver. Year before we needed a waiver. So my kind of the bottom line from a finance point of view, and really that's all I'm really speaking of on our waivers tonight, is that in order to ensure that you never need a waiver from the 65% rule, we've got to increase our spending on direct instruction by 9%. Okay, 9% of $650 million is a pretty big number. It's 50-some million. And so if you think about our budget, how do you move 50 million from everything else we spend money for into direct instruction? And that's the challenge of the 65% rule, and why I would probably suggest that we would probably be looking for a waiver at some point in our future. Just from the difficulty of continuing to find 2% to move in for the next, basically 5 years. Every year finding 2% more to move into direct instruction. So that's the impact of the 65% rule and why you might want to get a waiver from the 65%. Question?
Adequate attention. Can you hear me? Okay. Maybe I wasn't paying adequate attention. Why is it, do other districts meet the 65% rule
No.
and we don't? Or are there specific things that are peculiar to APS that make it so that we don't meet it?
Okay. An inside baseball kind of discussion is that many districts, if not most districts, do not meet the 65% rule. And what the state, in fact, there was legislation introduced, and the state board has at times considered, the State Board of Education already has made it easier to apply for the waiver. But there's been legislation kicked around about trying to eliminate the 65% rule because in many ways there's really no basis for saying that it's academically significant. And frankly, when I came to Georgia, I was kind of surprised that the state of Georgia had such a rule, because typically you see rules like that in states that have a high union, teachers union influence on the legislature, because they want to make sure districts spend money on teachers. And so they typically get that in. What you see, districts that meet the 65% rule, as I said, you know, the basis of the 65% rule is coding. And so really it kind of gets, it's almost like you hear stories about hospital billing and things like that, and how much money you get as a hospital depends on how smart your coder is. And so when you see us move from 49% to 56%, basically what you're probably looking at is we got smarter coders. We didn't really change much. And that my expectation is we'll move up again because we are getting smarter in how we code. So we've been looking over the shoulders of, say, like Savannah school districts that appears to have some very innovative coders and it's kind of surprising to see how they're coding some of their expenditures to get the expenditures to fall into the instruction category. So it's unfortunately it's kind of a coding game more than a real instructional benefit. That's why you kind of continue to get people talking about eliminating the rule, but it also says, you know, you may need to get a waiver from it if they don't eliminate it. So does that answer your question? Is that too much information, or, yeah? Yeah. Okay. You answered it. Okay. David. You don't have to do the full. You don't have to do the full 9% in one lump sum. You could do it in 2% increments. But each year, that's going to get harder. So while I might be able to do it for us this year, maybe the next year, but at some point it gets very hard to get that 2%. But that's just, you know, who knows. The next one, the next waiver I want to talk about is class size waiver. And this is, these data I think will probably I think they'll do several things. One, it'll probably show you, which I think there's probably been discussion before, who benefits from the class size waiver, who's hurt by the class size waiver. And then as the district, what's the impact on it from our finances? So there's 4 pages related to class size waiver. Two pages that says class size by dollars at the top of the first of those 2 pages, and then the next 2 pages are related. It's class size by teachers, and there's 2 pages related to that. So the bottom line, this little spreadsheet was designed to illustrate what the impact is of our current waiver that we received from the board vis-a-vis the state maximums. Okay, so I'm going to direct you to the second page of that first 2 sets and basically say, you know, if you eliminated the class size waiver, we'd need to find about $22 million. That's a little over $1 million of property taxes in order to eliminate the class size waiver. And whether you look at it in terms of dollars or by teacher counts, you could also see why is it that schools like basically Brandon and Smith lead the charge in saying, you know, these class size waivers are killing us. Well, in fact, it is, you know, because in some regards, because if you look at Brandon, this class size waiver is costing them 12 teacher allocations. You know, so it's a significant impact, and unlike many of our other schools, and why do you hear it from these corners of our district? Brandon and Smith don't get Title I money. So whereas any of these other schools that may have 1, 3, even 6 teachers reduced because of the class size waivers, they often have Title I money that they could restore class sizes. But Brandon Smith, we have these non-Title I schools that really, they don't have many options. So I think that illustrates two things. Why do you hear this from that corner of the district? And also, if you're going to solve it, how much does it cost us? It's a big lift to solve this problem. I'm ready.
So as a district, do we have the capacity to absorb the students of I know redistricting, but that horrible word. but-
Yes, yes. So when you look at the district in its whole, and you look at our capacity utilization, we have sufficient capacity for just about any student anybody wanted. We could absorb other districts into our spare capacity. I think I saw a figure, and we don't have a. Oh, Duck, you may not have this at the top of your head, but you might be able to get it. But I think I saw something where our capacity utilization is about 67%.
Probably very close, but I can get a good number.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have it off the top of my head, but that's what I've heard also, but I can get a good number.
Yeah, so essentially you're looking at a district where we're very short of capacity in some areas, and we've got a lot of capacity sitting in other areas. And that's one of our challenges, that we have schools that we close, say Kennedy, and on the other hand, we're building capacity elsewhere in the district. So, and you'll see that, yeah, so that's probably, that's really all I really wanted to illustrate on this waiver. So this is the second of the three waivers that I'm going to talk about, and that's the class size waiver. If we don't get that waiver, it's very expensive, but you can see why we have the controversy.
How many years would you say that we've had to apply for the class size waiver?
Have we been doing? I know it's been at least 3. Yeah, probably since maybe since about 2009-ish. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the time frame.
Since 2009, and like with the $22 million in savings, do you know how that money is like used? Is it used to
Used in
help
every other.
us, get more counselors or teachers or nurses or other roles that aren't as funded as the,
Well,
these particular roles?
Well, it's for any given year, our resources are essentially fixed. We have a fixed pie, and to the extent that you don't have to use resources on this slice of it for the teachers, that $22 million is used elsewhere in the district. So it could in fact be this year, for example, we added 50 SST support personnel. Well, okay, one of the reasons we were able to do that is because we didn't do this. So it's kind of like you don't do this, you can do that. If you don't do that, you can do this. It's all trade-offs. Budgets are kind of optimization exercises. They're not maximization exercises. So you think back last year when we didn't enforce the walk zones, a couple $1 million for additional buses. Well, you were able to do the couple $1 million additional buses because you didn't do state maximums. So any dollar you free up over here becomes a dollar you spend over here, and essentially we spend close to 100% of our resources every year. Certainly since the recession, because again, as a reminder, our local taxes dropped by about $100 million during the recession. So this is one of the reasons how we were able to stay afloat is through these kind of trade-offs.
In terms of our local taxes and the revenue, is it projecting upward right now? And are we seeing a gain year over year?
Yes, we are seeing gains year over year. They're not what we'd hope to see, but we are seeing gains again finally.
Like 1%, 2% as you?
Maybe as much as 3% this year, but unfortunately we expected more than 3%. So but we are seeing gains, which is better than seeing losses. So, but Some regards, you haven't seen the gains. Yeah, I think unfortunately the expectations are higher than the reality, in that the AJC is very good at reporting like house prices. Well, residential prices are only 50% of our tax base. The rest of it's commercial, industrial, and commercial prices are still very weak. And then the second thing is that in order for you to realize those gains, somebody from the county actually has to go out and reassess the property. And if you've been following the county budget discussions, they don't have enough assessors to reassess the city, or let alone the county. And so assessments are trailing the market significantly. But at least it's going up. It's better than going down. So that's really what I wanted to. So that's the second waiver I wanted to speak of. That was the class size waiver. The last waiver is probably more an exercise that, and the reason why I saved it for last, because in fact it is leased in this case. It's a waiver that most people don't really know much about, and in many ways it doesn't really affect us too much, if at all, right now, but we should be aware that it exists. And that's an expenditure control waiver. And so what I provided in these last two sheets is, again, something that you probably don't look at very often, but on the state's website there's a document that anybody can get, and that's called it's the earnings sheet. This is you might have heard people refer to QBE. That's Quality Basic Education Grant. This is the sheet that tells you how much money you're going to get from the state. Everybody can get this. It's on the state's websites. They have it for multiple years, so you can look at the history of it. And so what's important about this from a waiver perspective is that currently the state has granted a blanket waiver on what they call expenditure controls. So in normal times, really starting back in 2007, 2008, the state has a requirement that when they give you money in these categories, if you look down the direct instructional cost categories, kindergarten, primary grades, middle school, high schools, students with disabilities, these various categories, when they give you money in a category, they expect you to spend at least that much money in that category. But since the recession, they've given a waiver for that. So basically they say, because of the recession and we know funding's horrible, we're going to give you a pass, and if you don't really spend this amount in the category that we've given it to you, we're not going to penalize you for it. Whereas without the waiver, if you didn't spend the amount of money that they gave to you, at least that much, they'd have some onerous penalty that I'm not really sure, because in fact I've never heard of anybody. I haven't been here long enough historically to hear of anybody getting penalized for it, because it's pretty much been waived ever since I've been here. Not that that's a causal factor. But that's the waiver. And so what I've done for you on the second sheet, to try and illustrate why that really isn't much of an issue for us, is that I tried to summarize those QBE categories and the dollar amounts that we got in each of those categories, and then give you some reference on what we budget in each of those categories. And probably the takeaway is that we budget more than the state requires in every category. So that's probably why at some level this isn't that big of an issue in terms of getting a waiver, because every year that I've been here, we've always budgeted more than the state gave us in any individual category. You might think about, why is that possible? Well, you remember the state QBE revenue from that other sheet, it's $100 and some million, even after austerity adjustments and all that kind of stuff. State revenue is only about 25% of our general fund revenue. Our revenue comes from property taxes. And so because our salary tables are higher than the state salary tables, our teacher allocations, and all these kind of things we do are in excess of what the state requires in every category. So we probably would never find ourselves in a place where we need the expenditure control waiver, but you don't know. It's a waiver that's out there that you at least should be aware of, that it's providing at least in some districts, it's providing some flexibility from a programming point of view, but we haven't had to use that. So those are the three waivers that I'm most familiar with from a financial perspective, and so that's really concludes what I came to speak with you tonight on. There's a gentleman over here that needs a microphone. And so while they're getting him a microphone,
So does this waiver allow us the flexibility to move in our current structure dollars to different programming? So
if we wanted to take advantage of the current flexibility afforded by the expenditure controls being waived, if somebody got the wild idea that we wanted to eliminate gifted programs and spend all the money on kindergarten, we could do that within the waiver flexibility right now.
So Chuck, it's my understanding that if the status quo, one of the options is the state would take away all waivers.
That's correct.
Right. So what would that look like if the state took away all of these waivers and operationally?
Well, the first thing you'll know is that we'd have to come up with 22 million or plus to do teachers. Second thing is we'd have to find a way to make sure that we get at least 2% a year going more into direct instruction. And the third thing is we'd have to make sure that we always spend at least as much as the state QBE allocation is in the programs that it's allocated.
So just a quick follow-up. So if that was for the next year's budget, would that be a possibility? I mean, if the state took away all those waivers, would we have a budget that would be able to do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You kind of put me, maybe showing my hand a little. I'd say no. Probably just to not waffle on it. It'd be darn hard to run this district in FY16 without the waivers. We've seen a reluctance to increase millage. In 2008 or so, we reduced our millage by 1 mil, and the state doubled our homestead exemption, which cost us the equivalent of a mil. And we've never gone back and asked for additional funds. That's in part why property taxes were so down during the recession, it was self-inflicted in that regard. Trying to find $22 million in the budget, I've been working on a different presentation, related to upcoming fiscal years planning. But when you look at it and see how we spend our money, where do you have discretion in your spending? And unfortunately, the answer is we have very little discretion in our spending. In that, let me just tick off the numbers that I've been highlighting for people. Is that number one, under the state's statute, charter schools have called for first dollar of revenue, and they receive money based on a proportional share of their QBE earnings. And so right now in FY 15, we've budgeted about $71 million. Information I have to date says that number's going to go higher in FY 15 because they're going to increase their percentage of total enrollment. So their percentage of QBEs go up, even as QBE itself might go down a little bit. And from what I know about next year's charter schools authorization, that number's probably go be in excess of 80 million next year. So that money, you have no discretion over that. That money's going to go out the door. We have adopted an amortization table that requires approximately $50 million to go to unfunded pension. Based on our work with the actuaries and the state statutes related to pension funding, I don't think I've got any more rabbits to pull out of the hat to reduce that any further. So that's got to go out the door. There's some little things like we've got some lease payments, about $2-3 million for leases that you got to pay. Obviously, workers' comp claims, you got to pay workers' comp, so you don't have any discretion on workers' comp. And then you get down to issues like if you're going to operate 87 schools, you're going to have utilities, you're going to have cleaning, you've got all these expenses associated with just having facilities.
Chuck,
Too much information.
what percentage of our budget is in salaries and benefits?
Approximately 80%.
So to be clear, most likely if we had to operate without the waivers, there would be massive layoffs of personnel like support personnel, and in favor of hiring teachers?
Well, essentially, when you look at we have about 5,500 full-time employees. Currently, about 3,200 of those are teachers. And so if you're going to eliminate the waivers and hire another, what's the number here on the table? If you're going to hire another 316 teachers, it means you're probably going to have to lay off 316 something else's in order to do this within the fixed pie. And then if you start moving 2% of $700 million each year, that's going to be another, $14 million worth of teachers. So that's probably another 150 people that you'd have to move into instruction from everything else. So it'd be a heavy lift to move resources into the areas you'd need to move them to if you didn't have waivers.
Well, so a clarifying question, but so I thought direct instruction, 2%, or back to 65% rule, direct instruction. So that $22 million of the 658 is about 29%.
That would help, right? Yeah. So good catch, David, because that's exactly right. Because moving 300 and some teachers would help you on your 65% rule. Yeah, that'd probably move you about 4%. So that'd be a good start. Good catch. Thanks. Still hard, but thanks for the catch on the math.
Due to time, this will probably be our last question on this topic.
So how long has the state been offering waivers?
Most of these waivers I'm familiar with are a result of the recession, really since 2009.
So for about the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So in that 5 years' time, it seems like we're now dependent upon them, and we cannot at all imagine operating without these waivers.
Yeah, frankly, I can't imagine. Back when I first came here in 2007, I did analysis and said that basically, in order to kind of fund the district in the manner in which it had become accustomed to prior to the recession, you need about 7% growth in property taxes every year. Until we reach that kind of threshold, we're still struggling to make ends meet, and so it'd be hard. Nothing's impossible, but it'd be hard.
Okay, we wanted you all to have that information a little earlier because it was originally scheduled for this upcoming session, so we wanted to make sure that you had it. Chuck will be available next week to do any sort of follow-up conversations on this topic, but we have a guest speaker, and I don't want to delay his presentation. Dr. Steve Flint is from Gwinnett County Schools, and he has been working closely with that district for a long time, and he's going to talk to us about their adoption of the IE squared model and how that has been implemented in their school district. They were one of the first districts to become an IE squared district, and so at this time, I'd like for him to kind of come to the podium, and we've got his slides up on the screen at this time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here tonight. What time do I need to get finished so I can kind of tailor what I'm... Okay. Yeah, and I'd first like to start out to say thank y'all for what you're doing. This is impressive. Your questions are spot on. I really enjoyed listening to what you're doing with flexibilities. I know some of y'all are community members and in here helping to make these recommendations, and I know that means a lot to the district, but it really means a lot to the community as a whole, and we appreciate it out in Gwinnett, and so I'm sure that they definitely appreciate it here. I'm going to talk about IE squared. I'm going to keep it kind of informal. If you want to ask me questions along the way, I'll try to just stop and answer them. I was able to negotiate the contract back in 2008 when the law was established for IE squared, and so I learned a lot about it, and we kind of wrote some of that along the way. It's changed a lot since then. I'm not here to tell you that IE squared is the way to go. I'm not here to tell you that charter's the way to go either. But you probably are going to have to make some type of decision before June 30th of next year. I guess if not, you're going status quo. And that just doesn't sound real exciting. I don't know if that's what you'd want to do, but I don't know that I would want to step out and say I'd want to be status quo anyway. So we are in this situation where we are having to make these decisions. Obviously, we have a legislative session left ahead of us, and you just never know what's going to happen between now and the end of the legislative session. So we will see if something does change within that. I think another variable here, the guidance that's happening right now. I know y'all heard a presentation from Lou Ursty from the Department of Education, and we have worked very closely with them. He came in and has really made some great strides over the last couple of years that he's been there, and I've enjoyed working with he and Dr. McGivney and all down at the DOE, so we work closely with them. We also, as an IE squared district, work very closely with GOSA, the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. By law and written into the law, it's supposed to be a partnership, one between the district and the Department of Education, but it has input from the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And that input is pretty important because they're going to analyze that accountability and then report that back to the DOE. They have been great to work with as well. We are currently working with Martha Ann Todd down there and her team, and they're fantastic. So I'd have to say, no matter which way you go, it really just needs to fit your district. Charter systems, it really was not set up and available at the time when we went through IE squared. Just a little bit of history on that. There was a working group with then Governor Perdue, and it was on a book called Tough Choices, Tough Times. And they were really looking through that book and trying to find out ways to help school systems. And interestingly enough, that was in 2007-8, right before the recession. So we didn't know that the recession was going to hit when that was going on. And the question, the overwhelming question of the day was, how can we get out from under a lot of the mandates that are really tying us down? And it was taking a lot of time just listening to some of the things you were talking about that you're doing with waivers. Now that we've had this flexibility for 5 years, it really would be difficult to go back and not do some of the reporting we're doing. We've been able to reduce jobs that people were doing at the district level because we don't have to do that anymore. And so I guess at some levels you have to ask from a district, what is it that you're really going to hold tight and you're going to require of your people and your schools, and what is it that you can allow some flexibility? So we're in a situation now where the DOE and GOSA, obviously the legislators are involved in some of this with the adjustments on some of the bills that they've been looking to try to pass over the last couple of years. So there's some guidance coming out on charter systems as well as IE squared. So what I'm going to tell you today, and what Lou probably told you a couple of weeks ago, could and probably very likely will change a little bit between now and next summer. Now, what wouldn't change is whatever systems come in, you get a contract and you make that with the state, if you have that 5-year contract. And so, for example, we're going out of ours right now. We got an amendment for 1-year waiver. So we're going to have to do something, which we're working on right now, between now and next summer. Fulton County, for example, though, they still, I think, have 3 years. Kenneth was here last week, I think, and he's done a great job. I've met with them a couple of times. I really have enjoyed watching what they've done with charters. But theirs isn't going to change unless it's compelled by law. So what is going to change is the guidance that goes along with it. And that guidance is kind of important because right now they're coming up with some matrix that have to be followed. Within that matrix, you probably saw some of that Lou had, and it's like fill in the blank with your accountability. I would challenge you to really talk about that a little bit. Guidance is guidance. It's not law, and it's not state board rule. So when you go after your flexibility, whether it's charter and a charter system, or IE squared, or if you stay status quo, I would go about it and ask for the law and read that carefully, and then ask for the state board rule. Now, the guidance is probably very good, but if you have a compelling argument to go in a little bit different way because it fits your system in Atlanta Public Schools better, I would go for it and try it. It's a negotiation, it's a negotiated contract. So I would say work with it. So that's kind of my introduction there. And I am working right now on the new renegotiation of an IE squared contract. Ours went into place in 2009, so we started working on that in 2008. And what happened in 2008, which obviously y'all were just talking about, was something none of us saw coming, that recession, and it hit a whole lot harder than anybody else thought. So we didn't necessarily know we were going to have to use it to really protect our resources, but that's what it became during that time period. Interestingly enough, a lot of people have asked us, well, you had waivers because the state started this waiver process back in 2009, and as soon as we got the contract, it wasn't 6 months after that, and the state came out and said, you can have flexibility with class size. All you got to do is ask. And a little after that, they just made it a blanket waiver for everybody. So we had a lot of individuals, even in the community, that came up and asked the questions, and they were concerned about that. And they said, well, you've now got a contract for flexibility, but you could have this waiver anyway. And I do have a very good answer for that, because on our financial forecast, on our personnel forecast, we don't accurately do it 5 years out, but we do it 5 years out. And we really try to plan as accurately as possible. We can get much more accurate in 3 years, but definitely in that 1 to 2. So knowing that you're going to have that flexibility, and then asking, what are we going to do 3 years from today? What are we going to do 5 years from today? And go ahead and get the plans on paper right now. It can really save you some heartaches a little bit later. And so a lot of planning and a lot of processes go into that. Here's basically the thing that you have to decide. You've got to make a choice, obviously, between now and June 30th. We have already signed a resolution saying that we are going to go IE squared, so we're in that negotiation right now. All of our information, at least all that would probably be helpful for anybody to see, is on our website. So if you want more information about what we're doing, we put it up on the website. Right now, we have a draft strategic plan for IE squared out there. It's probably not going to be the final IE squared because we're still in those negotiations. But we put it out there. We had a public hearing at our last board meeting to get public input on that. I would say look at the rules very carefully. There are some things that you do have to follow as far as getting your public hearings, getting your board resolutions. So go ahead and get those down in a timeline now, whether you're going to go IE squared or a charter system, so you know that you can get out there. Obviously, you've got a great working group here, but you probably want to get these out and have a time for that board resolution so you'll kind of know where you're going prior to that point in time. So, yeah. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, when I read that, it says announcing the intent of our school to pursue the renewal. To me, that implies you have a choice. You can go to charter system, or does that really mean the new targets for the next 5 years?
This will be it is a renewal because we're currently under an IE squared contract, but it will be an entirely new contract. We do have the option, if we wanted to do that now, we could go charter system. Right now, we have an amendment that we passed that takes us through next summer to the deadline. And so right now, whether we would do IE squared or charter system, we'd be working we would be working on either one. Right now, we happen to be working on IE squared. And I believe that's the way we're going to go. Obviously, anything can happen and through the negotiations. But right now, that seems to be a very positive movement, a positive direction for us. That's a real good question, and a question that we're debating right now and talking with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And I'll get to it a little bit in here, but just to kind of answer the question, and I can breeze through that slide. The CCRPI is a statewide accountability system. And so what we've kind of been looking at is to take that statewide accountability system and use that number and look for improvement from that number. So I think how the measures are going to have to shake out at some point or another, we're going to have some kind of targets. So what is it going to look like? Is it going to look like an increase from where you are now to 100%? Is it going to look like above the state average, a certain percentage? We have a draft of what we would like, but we're still going through that negotiation. So even though we're going into a new accountability system, we think that the CCRPI will still be able to be a vehicle to use. Now, we're not going to, we're pushing to use next year's data, not this year's data for baseline. So our first year of the contract would be baseline. And then all the rest of the 4 years left on the contract would be based on that first baseline year, which would make it fair. I mean, you got to know where you are before you can decide where to improve. And, you know, I mean, it's just one of those things in education that probably drives everybody crazy, but you see it all the time. I'm going to improve 3% next year. Well, and it's a different test, and it's a different, you just can't, you can do that, but it just doesn't make any sense. And it really sends a bad message to your schools and to the people who are working with the kids, because it's not a realistic, it's not something that's compelling to the teachers. And so you really want to get it down at least to the school level to say, this is compelling for your school, this is going to help you. I don't know a teacher anywhere. I've met a lot of teachers outside of Gwinnett. I don't know a teacher anywhere that I've met that says they don't want accountability. They all want it, but they want fair accountability. They want it fair, and they want it in something that provides the context of where they are and where their school is. So don't hold me, you know, to a standard next year that is just not achievable for me right now. I gotta have a little time to know what it is and be able to get there. Give me some tools to be able to get there. So that's a great question. So the IE Squared partnership, we kind of say it has three purposes. The first, and interestingly enough, this is why it started, is it was designed for flexibility, and for good reason. Title 20 is obviously what we're looking for flexibility from, both in charter systems and in IE Squared. And I don't know, I haven't read all the education laws in every other state, but you'd be hard pressed to find as thick of a law as we have with Title 20 and how many mandates there are. I've read it so many times, but I read it again and I find something else I never knew about. And that's interestingly enough, I mean, there's a lot of people that probably don't even know that they're either supposed to do something or not supposed to do something. So I do think we need to shrink that down. I think that's a difficult thing to do, because once you go after one thing in the legislature, it's just tough. It takes a lot of political capital there to do that. So instead, we're going after flexibilities. And I'm okay with that. It's tough that we have those laws. They're also going after funding, obviously, right now, and looking at doing something with QBE. You know, a lot of states are trying to do what we have with QBE. QBE provides funding for every student based on what that student needs. Now, if we would fully fund QBE, we really would be in a great spot in the state of Georgia. QBE is in my opinion, it's a great funding formula. And it looks at the characteristics of the student and provides that funding and the additional funding in different areas for that. A lot of states would love it, and we're trying to get rid of it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with flexibility, with QBE. So flexibility was where it started. The second piece is accountability. That's really where you get all the movement, though. Everybody wants to talk about accountability, and then after they talk about the accountability, they want to hear the consequences, because that's where the drama is, right? What are you going to do? You got to hammer them. You got to get them, you know. That school didn't do it. We got to do something. I got to see it right now. And I just don't think inherently that's the way that we need to go about school improvement. We really need to go about school improvement to look at, what do you need to get better? How can I help you get better? And let's work together to make that happen. Now, if you don't, we're going to have some changes. That's understood. That is. But We try to provide the support prior to getting to that consequence place. Just to kind of go through what you have to do, and you probably have a lot of this in place, but you have to have a strategic plan. It is married to a strategic plan. The law was designed around a good business model. So assuming that you're ready to have a good business model, then you can put in this I-squared, and it's got to work with what you have within your system. And so whatever you have in Atlanta Public Schools, you should be able to weave that in, whether it's a charter system. You may have to adjust something. But we've been very fortunate, I would say. We have had a lot of changes in our district, but one thing that hasn't changed has been our leadership, our Board of Education, and our superintendent. And we don't do everything right, but we don't do everything wrong. But what we do is try to learn from the things that we don't get right the first time. And so when you have a continuation of that, you're able to kind of reflect a little bit. And so going through this right now, I can reflect, and we can kind of sit back and reflect on what didn't work the last 5 years. And IE² wasn't perfect the last 5 years, that's for sure. You know how many things changed with the accountability system in Georgia over the last 5 years? I mean, it was right in the middle of that. Common Core came up, and we're not even sure now with all the debate what's going to happen with Common Core between now and next year. So what's going to happen with the assessments? What's going to happen? So there's got to be talk about flexibility. You've got to weave flexibility into the system. And hopefully we are doing that, and hopefully that would happen with your question on the CCRPI. So that's one thing we learned, because we had some very strict targets set for every school to meet based on the requirements of the administration at that time at the DOE, and some of them were really difficult. As a matter of fact, we had some schools that went from their entire student population, as it was in 2009, in 2010 being a different group of students. We opened a school and redistricted, and all the students that used to go to that school went to another school, and that school got a whole different set of students. Now, that's not something that's that unreasonable to happen in a growing system. But what is unreasonable is to keep all the targets exactly the same that were based on the students that were there. It's just not reasonable. So you've got to build, and we didn't know that. We knew that we were going to be building schools, but we didn't really know how to redistrict. I mean, you can't guess, how y'all talking about redistricted. You never know which way those are going to go, right? So those are interesting times. We're about to go through some more redistricting, which will be interesting.
Can I ask you a question about the strategic plan? Is this something that you had in place 5 years ago, and that you're currently in the revision stage as you think about your next IE² renewal?
That's a very good question. Some of the pieces were in place. As a matter of fact, the vision and mission that are up here now came into place in 1996, 97. So these are long-standing. Some of the strategic goals, or all the strategic goals, are the same, and our board beliefs and commitments are the same. Of course, the board hadn't changed, so those things have stayed in place. A lot of other things have changed, and so I'd just say, so we have a vision and mission. We package this together for IE² and for it to work with IE². So the vision and mission, we have strategic goals that are in place, and we linked the IE² contract to where it would fit in the strategic goals. And obviously our first goal is based on student achievement. We have two areas, one for the board, core beliefs, and then another one called commitments of the board. And basically the commitments are the same thing as the beliefs, but they're action statements, or what we're going to do. And we revisit these to come back and say, okay, if we believe our core business is teaching and learning, then what is our commitment to do that? Well, we're going to give our core business, teaching and learning, priority over everything else. So we come in with an action statement for that, and our board has held to these for a very long time, and those have been successful so far. We're going to leave them in. You have all this data. I don't want to spend a lot of time on what Gwinnett is, but suffice it to say that we are very diverse and growing more diverse. We have had huge changes, not only in the last 5 years, but obviously we have schools that are in 99% free and reduced lunch, and some as low as in the single digits. Not very many, but a couple. Average is somewhere around 57 free and reduced. Some of the charts that you'll see in there are somewhat compelling to what has happened. We've really seen some increases in special education. I'd like to talk about gifted in a few moments because you brought something about that up. But kind of just watching these trends, enrollment has steadily increased since the inception of the IE Squared contract. We've opened about 20 schools. We'll probably open 10 over the next contract. We have a total of about 172,000. It's looking like we'll be about 1,500 over projection for this school year. Our EL enrollment has steadily increased. Our this last year was a huge spike in students with disabilities, and so that's been an interesting. We're kind of looking into where those are and how we can provide additional support. But that is a change over the last couple of years where you saw a steady increase, but not that sharp. Free and reduced lunch, we're about 57% now. But you know, the interesting thing about this is it's changed so dramatically over a short period of time. It really hasn't been a system. You know, when I started in the system back in '94. And since '90, it was a lot different. I mean, the whole system has just changed. We had some schools that have just completely changed, that flipped ethnicity and socioeconomics and everything else in the school. And so a lot of things have happened over the last couple of years. You can see the upper line is our white students. The next two lines are our African American and Hispanic. And so we're about to cross with the Hispanic. So we already have, obviously, majority minority, but it's much faster than the county as a whole. You see it happen in the schools first, and then it actually, I think the county became majority minority about 4 or 5 years after the school district did. So really interesting to watch those changes over time. This goes back to the CCRPI. Right now our work around accountability is kind of looking at the state average. If you look at what right now is happening in the realm of charter schools, they're asking for all charter schools to be above the state average. Well, I would think we'd want to stay above the state average too. You'd probably want your IE Squared schools to do that. I have heard of one district that wants status quo. I would assume that the majority of districts will go with either IE Squared or a system charter. And I just find it interesting and wonder how it'll work out if all those schools have to be above the state average. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So we have a results-based evaluation system also, and we merged that with the work that we're doing with IE Squared. Now, I don't know if y'all have a local accountability system, but ours is it's based on individual students, and so we really wanted to keep this. So we kind of have two accountability systems, or three really, because you have the state one, you have the CCRPI, you have IE Squared, you got another one with targets, and then you have the RBS, and then you dump on top of that all the teacher evaluation that's going on. There's a lot of accountability happening. So we're trying to mesh these so it doesn't feel like that for the schools, and it's not a one more thing. But at the same time, our RBS system actually goes and looks at an individual student scores, makes a prediction on where they need to be the next year, and provides a school effect over that with some sort of what we would call a regression analysis. You kind of plot all your kids out there and based on where they are, where they need to achieve. So we didn't want to lose that, and we took that to the state with IE Squared and asked them if we could use it. But it is a very intensive process to try to do that, and so it's not really scalable for the whole state. And so we said, that's fine, we'll go with this, with whatever you're using at the time, and at that time it was AYP, now it's CCRPI. But we're going to use that in conjunction with it. And so now we made CCRPI, and before we made our AYP a part of our results-based evaluation. So you get a certain number of points, basically, on it for our system. Okay, this is back to what y'all were talking about a little while ago with your flexibility and what you can do. So what do you have flexibility on? so there's some major differences here, and they're getting wider right now with IE squared and with charter. So with charter, the thing I keep hearing in the conversations and the guidance is, we don't want you to ask for flexibility, you're just going to get it. And on IE squared, it's kind of coming out, you've got to ask for your accountability, and we're going to make it somewhat proportional. And I'm still a little confused on how you can make it proportional, like which law is maybe enough for 1% on the CCRPI. I hadn't figured that out, but that's kind of what they're trying to do. So it's a proportional kind of thing. So that's a change. And so what flexibilities would you ask for? And I think at the state level, they're going to say, if you ask for less, then you don't have to have quite as much accountability. And so that might be appealing. I don't know. But there again, that's kind of a negotiated thing. And what we're continuing to do here is, this is really all the flexibilities that we have used and can think about using over the next 5 years. I don't know that that there are any others, but I'm sure they'll make them that we would want flexibility with. We had 13 that we used and we identified. And those 13 obviously have a lot with it, because when you get flexibility with regards to expenditure controls, there's a lot that goes into expenditure controls, right? So it seems small, but there's a lot that is in there. So we went to 14, and we've done a lot with these. I will tell you that the way we have used these flexibilities has probably been more impactful at the district level than anywhere else. It's been really interesting. Probably the biggest concern from our general public that came in when we went after IE squared the first time was, this is really the question that I heard over and over again. If you, the central office, get all this flexibility, how do I know at the local school, or how do I know as a person that's a stakeholder that you're not going to, they didn't say abuse, but basically that's what they meant. How do I know you're not going to abuse it and make all of our math classes 100 students each? And you know, that's a very good question. It really is. But all I could say at the time was, well, we've got a pretty good history of not abusing all the other thousands of flexibilities we have with you, so we're probably not going to do it here either. So now we got 5 years under our belt. We've provided the flexibilities to the schools, haven't abused that. I guess I would say, listening to your discussion on class size and some of these other things, we do things probably a little bit different. And if you talk about charter schools and flexibility for schools, our schools have had, since way before even '96, have had a lot of autonomy. And that came about not as a strategy, but it came about as a product of the growth. And so over the 6-7 years, we were growing 35 schools, just while I was at the district office. Prior to that, it was continuing that growth. We were building schools everywhere. We had more kids out of the building than we had in the building, and they were all in trailers. I mean, you know, I didn't even know they made bathroom trailers, but we had 2 or 3 of them at our schools. And it was really hard. So what you can't do in that situation is highly manage everything that goes on, because one, you can't increase the central office that fast. I mean, you just can't. And so what had to happen was, you had to just say, okay, principals, here's some flexibility, and you got to do it. But you got to follow these rules here, but stay within these guidelines. You're going to hire, we're going to give you the points, you can hire whoever you want, and as long as they get the background check and they pass through everything that we've asked. But you can pretty much hire. What about Title I? I mean, our schools pretty much have flexibility to spend their Title I funds. We download general funds to the schools. And so we just give the money to the principals, and they have to decide where to spend it. So that's been happening, and I wouldn't take credit as the strategy officer now, but it's been a great strategy, because the principals rose to the occasion. They took so then we came to them and we said, look, you got all this flexibility. Go out and figure out some innovative things to do with it. And so they all came back to us and they said, I want to do this and I want to do that. And I probably, in the first year of flexibility, and we really didn't want them to have to ask us for flexibility. We wanted them to just do it. But we wanted to keep track of it too, right? So to find out where are you using the flexibility. And so they would send us these flexibilities that they were going to do. And only one, in the whole first year, only one actually fell under one of these laws. They had flexibility to do it already. It was incredible. And we'd say, oh yeah, you can do that. You've always been able to do that. And so it changed the culture a little bit when we went through that activity. So yeah, you got a question?
That you have the flexibility in regards to school attendance, compulsory attendance.
Yeah.
So how are you using that at all to get school?
Yeah, we did. That was one of the ones we put in there, and now it's kind of a no-brainer because everybody's got cell phones and they subscribe to Twitter feeds, and our schools are getting apps, and we're sending stuff out, and Facebook is out there. Well, if you look in that law, you have to do certified mail. You have to send these things out at certain date intervals. Well, we want to notify parents, right, when kids are out. I mean, you'd be kind of crazy not to do that, but we don't want to have to fall into that one category and say, at this date, you need to do this, and at this date, you have to do that, and you have to do certified mail, so that takes somebody out of the building. You got to go to the post office, you got to fill out the form, you got to get, when we can email them, we can pick up the phone and call them. Just note that you called them, right? It's the same kind of thing with duty-free lunch. That was one of the things. You'd look on it, and the teachers that came to talk, they said, I don't want to not have lunch, and I didn't want them to not have lunch either. It wasn't something we were trying to take away. But what happens is there's a law that says you have to have duty-free lunch. Well, what happens on the first day of school? I have 3 girls in the system. All of them are girls. All of them cried probably the first day of their first 3 years, and when their teacher doesn't go with them the first day, they just don't know. They just get all upset and they get all. But I mean, how do you even know who to help? How do you get somebody to give that teacher duty-free lunch in kindergarten when the kids are first there? So you don't want to abuse it, but at the same time, you want to do what's best for kids, and these laws will hamper that. And so you got to keep that focus on what do you need to do, not what do you just want to do or what do you want to get out of. What do you need to do to help student achievement? That's really what you got to ask the question. And if we ever had a principal that was having issues with it, that's the question we would ask. So really, how's this going to help your kids? And how are you going to help move your school forward by using that?
And the last question would be, I see that you didn't choose to waive the local school council on A+ Reform Act portion, and you chose to use that as part of your strategy for local decisions. So
as a matter of fact, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, we have wanted to just embrace that one. And in our new contract here, we're going to embrace it even more because, when you look at a charter system, there is a lot of focus on the community and community input. We've never not wanted that, right? We love that. We like community to come in. So we want to expand our local school councils to continue to be able to say that we're doing it, but actually do it, right? And so to provide some additional training and some additional things like that. Now, I just thought of something with your question because y'all asked about the money, and I think the money's capped at $4.5 million the first year or $4 million or something like that. If you get charter system, one of the things we looked at was we would have to provide a lot of training for principals to comply with all the regulations. So how much are you going to have to spend just to make that happen? And ask Kenneth and Fulton, just ask them what they did. And I know that's a challenge. It's a challenge with local school councils, so it's got to be a challenge with, and I haven't done it, but I've talked to them, and so I'd continue to ask those questions, because if you're going to spend $7 million doing that, you hadn't really gained anything, right? So plus $4 million is money, but you find ways that will be spent through this process. So you're going to have to kind of safeguard resources while you go through this process. It's easy to spend money. Yeah.
When you were dealing with or wanting to use all these waivers, you put them in your initial application.
We did.
And then did you know every school that was going to use them? I mean, because I think the perception is that every school had to have their target, you know, which waivers are, I mean, is that all sewn up in the application? Or did you, it sounded to me like I was hearing you say, oh, a teacher or a principal now knows we have this flexibility and now they can use that. So
There's a bigger answer to, that's a great question. So when we went about this, we wanted them to have all the flexibilities, and we wanted them to be able to do things without having to go through the bureaucracy to do them, if it was the right thing to do at their school for their student needs. So in that discussion, what first came out, you know what educators love to do is to create a form. I mean, we're pretty good at that. And then we write some requirements to go with the form. And you know what happens? The form never goes away. It just gets longer, and it gets more requirements. And the same thing is happening with the requirements with IE squared and charter systems. You can argue it's a good thing. You can argue it's a bad thing. But in our strategy with this, it has always been to not increase any bureaucracy with it or red tape. So it was hard enough just to come out and say, okay, we really want to know what you're doing just so we can track it to know what's helping you and what you might need later. And so they just send us we have a very simple, just kind of a chart that has just openings, and it says what flexibilities regarding these are you using? And they just let us know with it. Now, the other thing, no, and we're still not. I don't want to. Yeah.
you know, more flexibility to figure out what you want to do down the road, whereas in IE squared you have to mostly everything figured out up front with all the targets tied to it. And maybe that's just my misperception, but I feel like that's what we've been hearing.
It may not
But now
be
in this presentation, I'm not hearing that. So now I feel like I'm a little back to square one, or maybe that's just.
That's a good question. That's why I say between now and the time this rolls around to next summer, that guidance is going to be strong. So through your negotiation, well, I mean, guidance is guidance. So as long as you negotiate through this with them and come up with a workable contract between your system and the DOE, and if it's IE squared supported by GOSA, then that's the contract. That's all I would say. I'm not there. I don't do their job. As far as my job, trying to go in and continue to negotiate this and to try to make it work for Gwinnett County Public Schools, the reason we went into this was so we didn't have to hire people to do more reporting and fill out more forms and do things that were just not helping. They really weren't raising student achievement. What it was compliance. And I've kind of got this thing about compliance, and it's I think that as a strategy, it's very good. It's focus on the accountability, not the compliance. I mean, I can write rules all day long, but you know, the autonomy is not going to happen, and the principal, because they feel like they have to do it over here, they're not going to have that intuitive want to do it as much as they would when they come up with it, or they have a parameter and then an opening to say, yes, I can make it fit with my students and my students' population. So that's the side I'm going to try to err on. Obviously, we're going to follow the rules and we're going to follow the laws, but I'll try to fall on the side of accountability over compliance every day of the week. Yeah. I read through Title 20, and I highlighted everything I could find that I didn't think anybody needed to do to help improve student achievement. Then I got a group of principals to read Title 20 and got them to highlight everything they could find. And then we, just got and then we presented it to the community, and there was some concerns the first time that we did that, because you're getting flexibility from something that is in code and in law. But I think we've been very good stewards over that over the last 5 years. And I would suggest, every school system probably would go into it with that intent. And you have to watch it carefully, and you have to obviously have the right people doing that. And I would think you probably have the right principals out there, or they wouldn't be principals. And you're entrusting them with a whole lot more than just a little compliance here.
So what was your principal's thinking as they looked at the code on ELL and then also the one on core curriculum in terms of wanting some flexibility around those two areas, and also what, if any, innovations or differences have come about as principals have used flexibility in those two areas?
Yeah, and that kind of also goes back to program requirements. I think that's on the next slide that you're talking about. Let's see. Educational programs was the next one. EL programs and educational programs, those are really right next to each other in Title 20. If you go in and read it, one goes through 155, and then we left 156. And we wanted to be real transparent, and actually the reason we didn't leave, it would have fit, educational programs would have fit, but we didn't want to look like EL wasn't there, right? Because you want to be as transparent as you can, and as soon as it said there was a thing on ELL, we said, we need that out there too, so people don't think we're hiding it in ed programs. But it's basically going to do what you need to do for those students based on their access scores, and providing them an intervention or a time, and it may not fall in to one of the normal models that you use. We use a number of them. I would say it falls into the same thing that Gifted does. As soon as we got the IE squared contract, and this wasn't really a focus when we did it, but the state came out with, I think it was 2, maybe 3, and they still do have somewhat rigorous models for gifted education. Well, ours didn't fit that, and you probably remember that, right? So it probably wouldn't fit into that. But we would have lost $4 million unless we had complied with that. Well, I'd argue that ours is better. And because of the compliance, it didn't fit. And so what you're not allowed to do is go out there and generate income off of this flexibility, but you sure don't want to lose it, right, by something that you're doing, and you're providing a good intervention for students and providing a good program for them. Yeah.
You had indicated that the school system already allowed a lot of flexibilities to the schools in regards to budgeting, and it sounded like there's a lot of site-based management. Do you think this model would have been more challenging had there not been that flexibility in site-based management already?
It's a great question, and I should have probably gotten to this a little bit. I would call our system, if you had to boil it down to a theory of action for a district. Y'all may have the theory, whatever type of theory of action you use. Ours would be managed, performance, and empowerment. I would say we heavily manage certain aspects of the district. Our processes are very rigorous and very clear when it comes to certain aspects, and one of them is curriculum. Another one is some assessments. But those are the things that the district holds really, really tight. All the other things, we continue to provide flexibility unless there's a problem. And so with budgets or hiring, or if the accountability is, if the student achievement's going down and the principal that's there is continuing to hire, probably we need an intervention in that just to make sure. And so we will clamp down on that flexibility, and basically our school improvement team will go in to say, we're going to help you a little bit with the hiring for a while. We're going to help you with your common planning time. We're going to help you with your common assessments to see what you're going to do. But right now the schools can do whatever they want, because a school in one part of the district may be very different from a school in another part, and they may need very different things when it comes to teacher planning, resources for students, what they buy, the teachers that they hire. We have relatively open flexibility with hiring. We download points to our schools. We basically convert it to points based on the QB formula, and our principals have those points to hire teachers. So if you got 100 points, you can hire 100 teachers. A parapro is about half a point. So
Can you swap that out for other positions?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. You
So
got
not
you
just
got to
to-
follow highly qualified. That's one rule, because you can't waive federal rule, and you can't waive special education, IDEA, or all these kind of things. So anything federal you can't get out of. This is just state. You got to remember that. But as far as hiring, they have flexibility. I will say over the last 5 years they've had less flexibility in hiring because the budget's been going down. And we didn't reduce our teaching force. We just did that through, we didn't hire teachers. So we ended up about 3,000 teachers less. Well, good thing we were growing. That would have been a huge reduction in force, but we were growing over that time. And so we didn't have to do that, fortunately. But yeah, they have the flexibility to do that. Same thing with administration. If they actually want to hire a bunch of administrators, they can do that. However, I mean, your school improvement person is going to notice that too. It's not like you're out there all alone. And if you're not getting the achievement or you don't have a really good, compelling reason, it probably wouldn't be good for you to do that anyway. So.
And then my last question is, you're ending your first 5 years, and there's consequences for schools that do not meet targets.
Right.
How is that panning out in Gwinnett? Do you have a high number of schools that are looking like they're not meeting the targets? And then what is the plan for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by law, there's two things that kind of have to happen. You had to pick, back when it started, the law said you had to pick one. You had to either go into a conversion charter status, which was the best at the time, or you had to be taken over by the state and run by the state. That'd be interesting. Or be run by another school district or a high-performance school district. So, I mean, that'd be just tough. I'd hate to go in and try to run any other school system, right, with the school system you already got. So that'd be tough. So the question is, and we have our targets, which is something we've learned about. Some of our high schools haven't met the targets over the last 2 years. Do you know what it is they hadn't met their targets in? Think about the changes in curriculum and the changes in assessments. What's one of the big ones? And it hadn't worked real well. Math too. Yeah, so last year's data, it'll be interesting to see really what happens. What happened with Georgia High School, it happened twice. So Georgia High School graduation test came up, and we had all these targets, and then EOCTs came in. Well, who were the kids left taking the Georgia High School graduation test? The kids who had failed it before, right? If they'd failed it, they had to everybody else was taking the EOCTs, and the high-performing kids were doing what? Passing it. So what do you think happens to your Georgia High School graduation test scores? Oh, yeah, they go down. So no school in high school made it that year because the only kids taking the course, and we didn't have an amendment or anything to go with that one. So the same thing happened again for the EOCTs in Math 2 and some other areas, and it's just a tough thing. So what we're having to do is go back now and look at all that data and look at other math scores and try to work with GOSA to find a way to reasonably match the targets with another math course. So I don't know, because we haven't finished the contract yet. So I don't know that I can say what's going to happen because we don't know what the data is from last year. It's a little slow coming in. As a matter of fact, we didn't get the data from the year before till this past summer. So it could be as late as spring before we get that data. So yeah, I think you're gonna have those challenges in either system, but you need to know that you need some more flexibility than we had, and so that's why we're going after CCRPI, and I think that'll really work a lot better. I don't think we would be in this situation had we had that accountability system or had we held on to AYP, although that would have been interesting, wouldn't it? AYP still in effect, so yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you all went into drawing up the IE squared and you already had a strategic plan. And it sounds like there were a lot of things systemically that were in place as you began this process.
Yeah.
How much of your relative success would you attribute to the stability from your superintendent and I assume from your central office in general?
Oh, that'd be a tough one to answer. Obviously, I attribute a lot of it to the superintendent. He's done a great job, and I work for him, and I've appreciated all the things he's done for us. So yeah, actually, he is a great guy and a very good visionary. Yeah, and that has no doubt has been a lot of it. But I will tell you, whether we had huge increases in student achievement over IE squared or not, we had a lot of benefit from it. We would not have been able to do what we did. We probably wouldn't have been able to weather the storm without a reduction of teachers over that time period had we not had this contract in place. And so it was very timely. We didn't know that the recession was happening. We actually went after it when we started the contract. We were starting to go full steam ahead with pushing heavy innovation and change, and we've really just been able to come back to that, because when you push out some large innovation, and y'all know you've done some career academies and things like that. We did that in 5 of our high schools this year. Well, we just didn't have the resources to do that at that time. Now, we wanted to do some of that, but all of a sudden when the economy hit, we weren't able to. So probably a lot of the innovation that we would have been able to do had the economy sustained, we decided we just couldn't do it at that time. So that's a very good question. So in your packets, you can look through these. It's not a lot different than I've said. The CCRPI goals, we did put in some operational goals and link those to the STAR climate ratings. And we haven't finished the negotiations, but I'm still thinking that we would do okay on those STAR ratings. So I'd hate to have a 5-star and say that you had to improve it, because that's all the stars you got, and you can't get any higher. So that's why it says equal to or above. And as soon as you put that equal to in there, some people get a little bit concerned. But on these, if you end up needing to rate it somehow, you probably need to do it equal to or above, or you'll miss it. So I think, yeah, and then we go into consequences, and I think you have some other slides in there, but I think my time is up, and I could probably stay all night to talk about I squared, but I know y'all got to go home. And I got strategic planning tomorrow morning, so I got to make it back by then. So that'd be good. Yeah. Well, thank y'all for doing what you're doing, and thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We all give him a round of applause. Okay, thank you so much. It was extremely informative, Dr. Flint. Thank you for making the drive down from Gwinnett to Atlanta. We greatly appreciate all that you do and all of the information that you've provided to us today. So we're going to go into our public comment period. Just as a reminder, speakers will be provided 2 minutes to address the advisory committee on any issue directly related to its work. There will be no dialogue between speakers and the members. However, we will be listening carefully, and in some cases, a speaker may be asked for clarification. After the public comment period has concluded, speakers are welcome to remain, but no further opportunities to address the advisory committee will be provided during the meeting. At this time, I would like for Mr. Ed Johnson to come forward for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hello again. I would like to give you a word and invite you to understand what the word means. The word is behaviorism, B-E-H-A-V-I-O-R-I-S-M. And just to give you a brief demonstration of how experiments with behaviorism have been conducted. Some animals, when presented with a jar with a cookie in it, the jar is arranged in such a way that the hand can go in, but when the hand is closed, it cannot be removed. When the hand grabs the cookie, it cannot be removed, okay? Money may not be your best opportunity, more money may not be your best opportunity. What will likely be your best opportunity is to learn how to improve the quality of your education system. It has been demonstrated time and time again by countries such as Japan, okay, that when you improve quality, costs go down. And you mustn't confuse cost with price. the more money you get may in fact drive your cost up and create a vicious cycle leading you to believe, as behaviorism demonstrates, the more money you get, the more you want, and the more you get, the less likely you are to want to let go so that you can extract your hand from the jar. So I share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sita Cook, if you'll please come forward.
Thank you. Bit by bit, getting more ideas. I really do hope to write something, whether for you or just for me. But as of tonight, this is partly based on last week and partly on tonight, I would be a lot more confident in the process if I felt that you were looking outside of the box as often as possible from last week, instead of looking at a bad school and immediately jumping to what waiver might help with the problems, to look at what are the synergistic mini problems coming together that are causing the difficulties, what might be ways to fix them, and some of those, the waiver might not be the best way to do it. In other words, go for waivers only if and when they are the only or best way to do something. And an example that I have to do, because I've heard it twice, not just here, about the class size. I heard it once here, and I heard it 2 nights ago at Lithonia High School at a somewhat similar meeting. And that was the only example that's come kind of from on high about what would be a good class size change, was when AP teachers were concerned about students who did well in their class but didn't do well in college. I've taught AP, I've taught AP teachers, and I've taught lecture classes in college. And I can say that the worst way to prepare students for large lecture classes or other college problems is to throw them into the deep end of a huge lecture class with the teacher having too many students to be able to work with them, to work on. I could do actually quite a good workshop on how to prepare students for that kind of work. And you could do it with 20 students, you could do it with 35. But the fact that I heard that example, both here and in Lithonia, worries me. There's certain things that keep being said because people haven't necessarily thought them through. So I encourage you to break out of the box, see what else is possible. Remember, we're going to have a new governor, a new state superintendent, lots of things. Things could change, and districts vary, as we just heard.
Thank you. Ms. Marilyn Tillman?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I am a Gwinnetian, so I'm going to bring you the community perspective of IE Square. It has been a great flexibility tool. The only things that I would say to you as a cautionary, one of the things that Gwinnett did was race-based performance targets, and that ended up being now there's a case made to spend more time and money on more advantaged students because they had the real performance targets anyway. So they're the ones who's not making the goals. For class size, I think you need to make sure that you're putting some restraints on that. My student, as he said, we started this 6 years ago, and I still had a student in school. His AP class went up to 40 kids. And sometimes some of the other kind of what you call connections classes ballooned as well to sizes that were difficult for teachers to manage. And that's in grading, management, just all that kind of issue. So make sure you look at that. In Gwinnett's contract, all the schools have all of that 14 list. You have to dig into the LSPI to really see which ones your schools are using, the local school performance plan. So, just think about that as you go forward. How can you make that more transparent to parents and community? And then Gwinnett does have 3 schools under state control right now. They're the disciplinary alternative schools and one of the regular high schools. And that was for graduation rate. So it wasn't one of those flexibility things, but think it through all the way across, because you're going to have schools coming from varying perspective. GOSA is extremely slow in turning around that data. We didn't see the first set of data till it was into the third year. That's too long, and I don't know what they plan on doing to make that better when more districts come online. Right now, they only have 3. And I would also suggest you look at Forsyth County's IE Square performance plan. They did a really good job of comparison for the performance targets, but theirs will have to change now too.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our public comment period. I want to thank all of the public that came to speak tonight. Now we're going to close our meeting next week. Oh, I need a couple of housekeeping items. One, if you wouldn't mind, I'll ask Rebecca to come around and make sure we collect all of the sheets related to our debrief related to the charter system discussion. Next week, we will begin our session with a closeout and a discussion around IE squared. Our focus topic for next week includes kind of a closer look at what's happening in Atlanta Public Schools in terms of the current work and our plans. So you'll have a deeper dive for that. I would encourage, if you haven't already, make sure that you get the word out regarding the upcoming sessions, the upcoming community sessions. We really are encouraging everyone to come out, share their perspective, learn and get all of the information. Also, if you haven't already been to the website, 2 homework assignments. 1, please go out to the website and look at our IE squared. Go out to the information. This week we will post the IE squared information, but last week charter system information is out there. The audio is out there, and also we did a video from last week's session, and we're also doing a video from this week's session. So that will also be online. You can share the links with other people so that they can hear exactly the conversations and the presentations that we're having in our advisory committee meetings. I think are there questions? Hold on. If there's no other questions, are there any questions that you want to make sure that's included in our work next week around status quo and what the district is currently doing? Yes. Go ahead.
Clarification on whether or not any waivers would be available due to financial hardship under status quo, because we've been hearing, at the visioning meeting yesterday, a board member mentioned that he had heard the state recently say that under status quo you could still get the class size waiver with financial hardship, but that's not necessarily what I'm hearing here. So if we could just get clarification on that point from the state before the meeting, that would be really helpful.
I believe Lou Ersty will be with us next week so that we can ask some follow-up questions on all the models, but we can focus in on some of the questions that we have around status quo so we can get some additional information. He will be with us next week. Are there any other questions for the meeting next week or information that you want to make sure you have? Okay, this concludes our meeting. If the principals would stay for a minute, I'd like for the principals to stay for just 1 minute. All right, thank you.